Volume 1, Book 8, number 368. Narrated by Aisha. Allah's apostle used to offer the Fajr prayer, and some believing women covered with their veiling sheets used to attend the Fajr prayer with him, and then they would return to their homes unrecognized. Volume 1, Book 8, number 369. Narrated by Aisha. The Prophet prayed in a kamisa, a square garment, having marks. During the prayer, he looked at its marks. So when he finished the prayer he said, "Take this kamisa of mine to Abu Jam and get me his inbijaniya, a woolen garment without marks, as it, the kamisa, has diverted my attention from the prayer." Volume 1, Book 8, number 370. Narrated by Aisha. The Prophet said, "I was looking at its kamisas, marks during the prayers, and I was afraid that it may put me in trial by taking away my attention." Volume 1, Book 8, number 371. Narrated by Anas. Aisha had a kiram, a thin marked woolen curtain, with which she had screened one side of her home. The Prophet said, "Take away this kiram of yours, as its pictures are still displayed in front of me during my prayer, i.e., they divert my attention from the prayer." Volume 1, Book 8, number 372. Narrated by Uqba bin Amir. The Prophet was given a silken faraj as a present. He wore it while praying. When he had finished his prayer, he took it off violently as if with a strong aversion to it, and said, "It is not the dress of Allah-fearing pious people." Volume 1, Book 8, number 373. Narrated by Abu Juhayfa. I saw Allah's apostle in a red leather tent, and I saw Bilal taking the remaining water with which the Prophet had performed ablution. I saw the people taking the utilized water impatiently, and whoever got some of it rubbed it on his body, and those who could not get any took the moisture from the others' hands. Then I saw Bilal carrying an anza, a spear-headed stick, which he planted in the ground. The Prophet came out tucking up his red cloak, and led the people in prayer and offered 2 rakat, facing the Kaaba, taking anza as a sutra for his prayer. I saw the people and animals passing in front of him beyond the anza. Volume 1, Book 8, number 374. Narrated by Abu Hazim. Sa'al bin Sa'd was asked about the Prophet's pulpit as to what thing it was made of. Sa'al replied, "None remains alive amongst the people who knows about it better than I. It was made of tamarisk wood, of the forest. So and so, the slave of so and so prepared it for Allah's apostle. When it was constructed and placed in the mosque, Allah's apostle stood on it facing the Qibla and said, Allahu Akbar. And the people stood behind him, and led the people in prayer. He recited and bowed, and the people bowed behind him. Then he raised his head and stepped back, got down and prostrated on the ground, and then he again ascended the pulpit, recited, bowed, raised his head and stepped back, got down and prostrate on the ground. So, this is what I know about the pulpit." Ahmad bin Hanbal said, "As the Prophet was at a higher level than the people, there is no harm according to the above-mentioned hadith, if the Imam is at a higher level than his followers during the prayers." Volume 1, Book 8, number 375. Narrated by Anas bin Malik. Once Allah's apostle fell off a horse and his leg or shoulder got injured. He swore that he would not go to his wives for 1 month, and he stayed in a mashruba, attic room, having stairs made of date palm trunks. So his companions came to visit him, and he led them in prayer sitting, whereas his companions were standing. When he finished the prayer, he said, "Imam is meant to be followed. So when he says, Allahu Akbar, say, Allahu Akbar, and when he bows, bow, and when he prostrates, prostrate, and if he prays standing, pray, standing." After the 29th day the Prophet came down from the attic room, and the people asked him, "O Allah's Apostle, you swore that you will not go to your wives for 1 month." He said, "The month is 29 days. Volume 1, Book 8, number 376. Narrated by Abdullah bin Shaddad. Maimuna said, Allah's Apostle was praying while I was in my menses, sitting beside him, and sometimes his clothes would touch me during his prostration. Maimuna added, he prayed on a kumra, a small mat sufficient just for the face and the hands while prostrating during prayers. Volume 1, Book 8, number 377. Narrated by Ishaq. Anas bin Malik said, my grandmother Mulaika invited Allah's Apostle for a meal which she herself had prepared. He ate from it and said, "Get up. I will lead you in the prayer." Anas added, I took my hasir, washed it with water as it had become dark because of long use, and Allah's Apostle stood on it. The orphan, Damira or Ru, and I aligned behind him, and the old lady, Mulaika, stood behind us. Allah's Apostle led us in the prayer and offered 2 rakat and then left. Volume 1, Book 8, number 378. Narrated by Maimuna. Allah's Apostle used to pray on Qumrah. Volume 1, Book 8, number 379. Narrated by Abu Salama. Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, said, I used to sleep in front of Allah's Apostle and my legs were opposite his Qibla, and in prostration he pushed my legs and I withdrew then, and when he stood, I stretched them. Aisha added, in those days the houses were without lights. Volume 1, Book 8, number 380. Narrated by Aisha. Allah Apostle prayed while I was lying like a dead body on his family bed between him and his Qibla. Volume 1, Book 8, number 381. Narrated by Urwa. The Prophet prayed while Aisha was lying between him and his Qibla on the bed on which they used to sleep. Volume 1, Book 8, number 382. Narrated by Anas bin Malik. We used to pray with the Prophet, and some of us used to place the ends of their clothes at the place of prostration because of scorching heat. Volume 1, Book 8, number 383. Narrated by Abu Maslama. Said bin Yazid al-Azdi, I asked Anas bin Malik whether the Prophet had ever prayed with his shoes on. He replied, yes. Volume 1, Book 8, number 384. Narrated by Ibrahim. Haman bin al-Harith said, I saw Jarrah bin Abdullah urinating. Then he performed ablution and passed his wet hands over his cuffs, stood up and prayed. He was asked about it. He replied that he had seen the Prophet doing the same. They approved of this narration as Jarrah was one of those who embraced Islam very late. Volume 1, Book 8, number 385. Narrated by Al-Mughira bin Shuba. I helped the Prophet in performing ablution and he passed his wet hands over his cuffs and prayed. Volume 1, Book 8, number 385. Narrated by Abdullah bin Malik. Ibn Buhayna. When the Prophet prayed, he used to separate his arms from his body so widely that the whiteness of his armpits was visible.